you talked about Republicans taking money from a Jeffrey Epstein. Here's what you said.
Who also took money from somebody named Jeffrey Epstein, as I had my team dig in very quickly. Mitt Romney, the NRCC, Lee Zeldin, George Bush, Win Red, McCain Palin, Rick Lazio.
You mentioned Lee Zeldin there. He's now a cabinet secretary. He responded and said it was actually Dr. Jeffrey Epstein, who's a doctor, doesn't have any relation to the convicted sex trafficker. Unfortunate for that doctor, but that is who donated to a prior campaign of his. Do you want to correct the record on the people?
I never said that it was that Jeffrey Epstein, just so that people understand when you make a donation, your picture is not there.
When CNN's Caitlin Collins played that clip, Jasmine Crockett's face said it all. Caught red-handed, spreading blatant lies about Republicans. Humiliated on national television. Nowhere to hide. What happened next wasn't just embarrassing, it was a masterclass in how today's politicians will say absolutely anything, no matter how false, as long as it hurts their enemies. Even when confronted with video evidence of their lies, they refuse to apologize. They double down. They deflect. They do everything except tell the truth. But this story isn't just about one congresswoman's shameless dishonesty. It reveals something far more disturbing about how Washington elites are handling the Epstein scandal. For years, they ignored it. For years, they pretended it wasn't happening. Then suddenly, when they thought they could use it as a political weapon, they couldn't stop talking about it. Not because they care about the victims, not because they want justice, but because they saw an opportunity to score cheap political points. What Jasmine Crockett didn't realize was that CNN had receipts, and when they played that damning clip of her false accusations, it exposed not just her lies, but the entire corrupt game Washington insiders are playing with one of the most horrific sex trafficking operations in American history. Before I show you exactly how Crockett's lies unraveled on live television, you need to understand the cynical game Democrats are playing with the Epstein files. For 4 years, 4 long years, they were silent. Where was their outrage when victims were begging for justice? Where were their demands for transparency when the files were sealed? Where was their concern for the children who had their innocence stolen? Nowhere. Because they couldn't use it as a political weapon yet. Only when they thought they could pin it on Trump did they suddenly discover their moral outrage. Only when they believed they could score political points did they start talking about it. It wasn't about the victims. It was never about the victims. It was about political opportunism at its most disgusting. And no one embodied this cynical approach more perfectly than Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Watch what happens when she's asked a simple question about whether the Epstein files will embarrass Democrats. Crockett smugly declares, "I ain't never worried about my name being in the Epstein files," then immediately pivots to attacking Trump. Classic misdirection. She talks about sitting across from victims and understanding trauma and lasting effects. She wraps herself in the cloak of someone who deeply cares about justice. But it's all an act, because in the very next breath, she's using these victims as political pawns. She's not talking about getting justice for the people Epstein abused. She's talking about January 6th. She's talking about Trump pardons. She's talking about everything except the actual issue at hand. To me, it's not political, she claims with a straight face, then proceeds to make it entirely political. This is Washington in a nutshell. Say one thing, do the complete opposite. Hope no one notices the contradiction. But Caitlin Collins didn't let her get away with it. In a rare moment of actual journalism, CNN played the receipts. They showed exactly what Crockett had said previously, and it was devastating. Here's what Crockett claimed on the House floor. Who also took money from somebody named Jeffrey Epstein? As I had my team dig in very quickly. Mitt Romney, the NRCC, Lee Zeldin, George Bush, Win Red, McCain Palin, Rick Lazio. Not subtle implications. Direct accusations that these Republicans took money from a notorious sex trafficker. Accusations made on the floor of the House of Representatives. Accusations that would immediately go viral and smear the reputations of everyone she named. Just one tiny problem. It was a completely different Jeffrey Epstein. A doctor with zero connection to the convicted sex trafficker. A fact that would have been immediately obvious to anyone who spent more than 30 seconds looking at the FEC filings. When confronted with this blatant lie, watch how Crockett responds. Does she apologize? Does she admit her mistake? Does she show an ounce of integrity? No. She doubles down with one of the most ridiculous defenses you'll ever hear. I never said it was that Jeffrey Epstein. Let that sink in. She goes on the House floor, lists Republicans who supposedly took money from somebody named Jeffrey Epstein right after talking about the Epstein scandal, clearly intending to link them to a sex trafficker, and then claims she wasn't trying to mislead anyone. This isn't just dishonesty, it's gaslighting on a congressional scale. She knows exactly what she was doing. Everyone watching knows exactly what she was doing. And yet she looks into the camera and claims, "At least I wasn't trying to mislead people." If falsely linking your political opponents to a child sex trafficker isn't misleading people, what is? The contempt for voters' intelligence is staggering. The belief that Americans are too stupid to see through such an obvious lie is insulting. And let's be crystal clear about something else. This wasn't some innocent mistake. The FEC database that her team supposedly consulted lists the occupation of every donor. In Lee Zeldin's case, it clearly identifies the donor as a physician, a doctor, not a wealthy financier running a sex trafficking operation. Even more damning, the Jeffrey Epstein everyone is talking about died in 2019. The donation she's referencing came in 2020 from a living doctor named Jeffrey Epstein. Did her team think the notorious sex trafficker was making donations from beyond the grave? This isn't incompetence. It's deliberate deception. And when caught, instead of taking responsibility, she blames her staff, claiming they Googled and apparently couldn't figure out that a dead man wasn't making political donations. But the real smoking gun in this interview comes when Collins presses her about Stacey Plaskett, the Democratic delegate who was caught texting with the real Jeffrey Epstein about congressional hearings. Suddenly, Crockett's righteous indignation about sexual predators vanishes. Suddenly, her concern for victims evaporates. Instead, she offers excuse after excuse. She was a former prosecutor. He was one of her constituents. Prosecutors typically talk to co-defendants. She didn't initiate the text chain. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. When she thought Republicans were connected to Epstein, it was a moral outrage demanding immediate condemnation. When a Democrat is caught red-handed coordinating with him, suddenly it's all about context and understanding why. And then the final deflection. The bigger question is, why is the President of the United States not the one that is in the hot seat for his relationship? This is the Washington playbook in action. When caught lying, change the subject. When your side does something wrong, point to the other side. When confronted with facts, create a distraction. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing. The facts about Stacey Plaskett are far worse than Crockett admits. Plaskett didn't just exchange a few innocent texts with Epstein. Her campaign took money from him on multiple occasions. After his 2019 arrest, when the world knew exactly who and what he was, CNBC reported on these donations. And Plaskett's initial response? She refused to return the money. Only after overwhelming public pressure did she finally announce she would donate the contributions to organizations in the Virgin Islands. Not because she thought it was wrong to take a sex trafficker's money, but because the political heat became too intense. Yet Crockett voted against censuring Plaskett. The same Crockett who was perfectly happy to falsely accuse Republicans of taking money from somebody named Jeffrey Epstein couldn't bring herself to hold a Democrat accountable for actually taking money from the real Jeffrey Epstein. When Collins presses her on this blatant double standard, Crockett's response is almost comical. The Republicans are constantly texting with a 34-count convicted felon. Again, the deflection. Again, the whataboutism. Again, the refusal to address the actual issue at hand. But the most revealing moment comes when Crockett tries to justify why it might be appropriate for a congresswoman to be texting with a registered sex offender about congressional hearings. Listen to this tortured logic. Let's say Jeffrey Epstein said, you know what? I have these pictures, these salacious pictures, because I know that the president got down and did these things. Do you think that it would be inappropriate for her to ask about those things? This is the game laid bare. It's not about protecting children. It's not about getting justice for victims. It's about finding dirt on political opponents. It's about weaponizing one of the most horrific sex trafficking operations in American history for partisan advantage. And Crockett doesn't even try to hide it. She openly admits that what matters isn't Epstein's crimes, but whether those crimes can be linked to her political enemies. This isn't just disgusting politics. It's a betrayal of every principle decent Americans hold dear. It's a slap in the face to every victim who suffered at Epstein's hands. It's turning unimaginable trauma into a political football to be kicked around for partisan advantage. The Epstein case represents one of the most sickening failures of our justice system. Powerful people on both sides of the political aisle enabled and protected a monster for decades. Victims were ignored, silenced, and intimidated. Law enforcement agencies that should have stopped him years earlier failed in their most basic duty to protect the vulnerable. This should be a moment for national soul-searching, for bipartisan commitment to exposing the truth no matter who it implicates, for putting victims first and politics last. Instead, we get Jasmine Crockett lying about Republicans taking money from somebody named Jeffrey Epstein while defending a Democrat who actually did take money from the real Jeffrey Epstein. We get transparent attempts to use this tragedy as a political weapon rather than a call for justice. Crockett's claim that no one knew about Epstein's actions in 2019 is perhaps the most insulting lie of all. Major outlets like The Guardian, Politico, BBC, and ABC had already published detailed reports about him in 2015. Everyone in Washington knew. Everyone in power knew. They just didn't care until they thought they could use it politically. And that's the real tragedy here. These victims, these children who had their lives destroyed, don't matter to people like Jasmine Crockett except as political ammunition. They're not human beings deserving of justice. They're tools to be used against political opponents. This scandal transcends politics. It's not about left versus right. It's about right versus wrong. It's about whether we as a society are willing to protect the most vulnerable among us or whether we'll sacrifice them on the altar of political expediency. Anyone connected to Epstein's crimes should face consequences, regardless of political affiliation. Anyone who enabled him, protected him, or turned a blind eye to his abuses should be exposed and held accountable. Democrat or Republican, Liberal or conservative, no one should get a pass. But that's not what's happening. Instead, we're watching politicians like Crockett use these victims as props in a political theater, making false accusations against their enemies while defending their allies, pretending to care about justice while making a mockery of it. The most damning part of Crockett's CNN interview isn't her lies about Republicans taking money from somebody named Jeffrey Epstein. It's not even her defense of Plaskett's actual connections to the real Epstein. It's the cynical game she's playing with one of the most serious moral failings of our time. Children were abused, lives were destroyed, a powerful predator operated with impunity for decades because the system protected him. And Crockett's response is to use this tragedy to score cheap political points with false accusations. This isn't just bad politics. It's a moral abomination. It's taking the suffering of innocent victims and exploiting it for partisan advantage. It's treating one of the greatest injustices in recent memory as just another opportunity to attack political opponents. The Epstein scandal should unite Americans in righteous anger. It should transcend political divisions and remind us that some evils are so profound that they demand a united response. It should be a moment when we put aside partisan differences and commit ourselves to a single principle. No one is above the law, and no child should ever suffer what Epstein's victims endured. Instead, we get Jasmine Crockett spreading lies on the House floor, then doubling down when caught. We get transparent attempts to weaponize victimhood for political advantage. We get the worst of Washington when we need the best of America. The real question isn't whether Democrats or Republicans are more connected to Epstein. The real question is whether we as a society care more about protecting children or protecting our political tribes. And right now, politicians like Crockett are giving us a disturbing answer. If this breakdown of Crockett's CNN humiliation opened your eyes to how politicians are playing politics with the Epstein scandal, hit that subscribe button right now. We're going to keep bringing you the stories others won't touch, the clips others won't show, and the truth others try to hide. And while you're at it, check out our new merch store. The link is in the description. Every purchase helps us continue bringing you stories the mainstream media tries to bury. The Epstein case isn't about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about powerful versus powerless. It's about a system that protected a predator because he had connections to the elite. And until we treat it with the moral seriousness it deserves, until we demand accountability from everyone involved regardless of political affiliation, we're complicit in the very corruption that allowed this monster to operate for decades. Jasmine Crockett's lies and deflections aren't just an embarrassment to her, they're an insult to every victim who deserves justice. They're a reminder of why Americans are so disgusted with Washington, and they're why we need to keep pressing for the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes politicians on both sides of the aisle. Thanks for watching, and remember, keep thinking. Because in a world full of Jasmine Crockett's trying to mislead you, critical thinking isn't just a skill, it's a moral obligation. We need to keep pressing for the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes politicians on both sides of the aisle. Thanks for watching, and remember, keep thinking. Because in a world full of Jasmine Crockett's trying to mislead you, critical thinking isn't just a skill, it's a moral obligation.